It was a cold October evening in 2023, and the diner in Los Angeles was busy with people. An older man named Franklin rolled in quietly in his wheelchair. His military jacket was faded and his face looked tired. Sitting beside him was his service dog, Buddy, who stayed calm and loyal. Franklin had had a long day of doctor visits, and he just wanted a warm meal before heading home. But when Franklin asked for a table, the waiter, a young man named Ethan, frowned and refused. He said loudly, "We don't serve people like you here." Franklin's voice trembled as he tried to explain. "I fought for this country. I've given so much. I just want to eat a meal. Why are you turning me away?" Ethan smirked and crossed his arms. "Rules are rules," he said coldly. "No dogs allowed. No exceptions. Go somewhere else." The diner got quiet. People whispered to each other, but no one stood up for Franklin. Ethan just stood there, looking mean and proud of himself. In a corner booth, someone else was watching. A man wearing a hoodie sat quietly, trying not to be noticed. His name was Keanu Reeves. He was a famous movie star, but he wasn't there to be seen. He had come for some peace and quiet after a long day of filming. But now he couldn't stay silent. Keanu stood up. He was tall, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but strong. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" he asked Ethan. The whole diner went silent. Ethan froze. His smirk faded as Keanu looked around at the other people sitting in the diner. "Are you all just going to sit here and let this happen?" Keanu asked, his voice growing sharper. A woman wearing a paramedic uniform stood up nervously. "I was just about to say something," she said, her voice shaking. Keanu turned back to Ethan. His eyes were serious and his tone was firm. "This man gave everything for this country," Keanu said, pointing at Franklin. "He fought so people like you could live in freedom. If you think treating him like this is okay, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." Ethan's face turned pale and he opened his mouth to argue, but before he could say anything, the diner door swung open. 2 police officers walked in. They had gotten a call about a disturbance. One of the officers, a man named Detective Mark Donnelly, looked around the room and saw Franklin. His face darkened as he asked, "Franklin, what's going on here?" Before Franklin could explain, Keanu stepped forward. "This man was refused service because he's a disabled veteran," Keanu said. "Maybe you can remind the waiter what the law says about that?" Ethan looked scared now. He started stammering excuses, but Detective Donnelly raised his hand to stop him. As the officer began questioning Ethan, Keanu knelt beside Franklin and spoke softly. "Are you okay, sir?" Keanu asked. Franklin nodded slowly. His eyes were watery as he looked at Keanu. "I never thought a movie star would stand up for me," he said with a faint smile. Keanu smiled back, but his face stayed serious. "It's not about being a star," he said gently. "It's about doing what's right." Suddenly there was a loud crash. Glass shattered near the diner's entrance. Everyone turned to look. A man wearing a mask and holding a gun stepped inside. He was shouting, "Nobody move." The room filled with fear. Buddy, Franklin's service dog, growled low, standing protectively beside his owner. Keanu, still kneeling next to Franklin, whispered, "Stay calm." The masked man waved his gun in the air. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he shouted. "I just want to feed my kids. They're starving." Keanu looked carefully at the man. His shoes were torn, his jacket was thin and old, and he looked tired and desperate. Franklin stayed calm and spoke up. "Son, put the gun down," he said gently. "You don't have to do this." The masked man turned to Franklin, his hands shaking. "Don't tell me what to do," he yelled. "You don't know what it's like to have nothing." Franklin's eyes softened as he listened. "Don't I?" he said quietly. "I came back from war to a country that forgot me. I've been homeless. I've been hungry. But this isn't the way." The room was silent, except for Buddy, who let out a soft whimper. Franklin leaned forward in his wheelchair. "You don't have to do this," he said again. "Let us help you." The masked man's hand trembled. He looked at the gun and then at Franklin. "Help," he cried. "No one helps people like me. No one." Tears rolled down his face. "I lost my job, my home, my wife. My little girl looks at me like I'm a stranger. I'm nothing to her." Hearing this, Franklin took a shaky breath. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small old photo. It was a picture of a little girl no older than 6. She was smiling brightly, her toothy grin full of joy. "I know what it feels like to lose everything," Franklin said, his voice heavy with emotion. "This is my daughter. I haven't seen her in years, but I carry this picture everywhere I go. It reminds me that even when life feels impossible, there's still hope." The masked man stared at the photo. His gun lowered slightly and his shoulders slumped. I just want it to be enough for her, he whispered. But I can't. I don't know how. Keanu stood up slowly, his hands raised. His voice was calm and steady. You're not alone, he said. Whatever you've lost, whatever you're carrying, there's a way to make things better. Let us help you. The man's eyes filled with tears. He looked around the diner at the frightened faces and then back at Franklin and Keanu. Finally, he dropped the gun. Detective Donnelly quickly moved to secure the weapon, but he didn't arrest the man right away. Instead, he looked at him closely and said, "Let's get you some help." The tension in the room began to ease. People started to relax and a few even clapped quietly. The man sat down at a table, shaking and crying. Franklin reached over and put a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be okay," he said. "We'll figure this out together." Keanu nodded. "You did the right thing," he told the man. "That's the first step." The diner was quiet again, but this time it wasn't because of fear. It was because everyone had witnessed something important. A moment of kindness, understanding, and hope. Even though the picture was old and worn, John held it tightly. "This is my daughter," he said, his voice shaking. Her name was Clara. The room seemed to hold its breath. Keanu looked at John and then at the man with the mask. He could feel something heavy in the air. The masked man whispered so softly it was hard to hear, "She's gone?" John nodded, his voice breaking. "She passed away. I wasn't there when she needed me the most. Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't. The war took that from me. Don't let this take you from your daughter." The masked man's legs wobbled and he held his chest as if it hurt. Tears poured down his face and his gun fell to the floor with a loud clatter. Buddy, the dog, barked once, then walked over to the man and gently nuzzled his leg. "I'm sorry," the man whispered, dropping to his knees. I didn't know what else to do." Keanu crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out," he said gently. "You're not alone anymore." The police officers who had been quietly watching from the doorway slowly came in. They moved carefully, trying not to scare anyone. But before the man was taken away, John reached out and held the man's trembling hand. "Take care of your daughter," John said, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Don't let her grow up without her dad." The man nodded, sobbing as the police led him outside. The diner became very quiet. Everyone was thinking about what had just happened. It was a moment full of sadness, kindness, and hope all mixed together. Keanu looked at John with a mix of sorrow and respect. "You've been through so much," he said softly. John nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "But maybe tonight I help someone else get through it too." The story didn't end there. It couldn't. The lives of the people in that diner, Keanu, John, the masked man, were all connected now by this moment. Some wounds would heal, others would not, but the memory of that night would stay with them forever. It had changed them in ways they couldn't yet understand. The diner stayed silent for a while. Then, slowly, the people began to talk and move again. The waitress, who had been standing frozen behind the counter, walked over to John. Her hands were shaking as she placed a plate of food in front of him. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't stop him. I should have. You didn't deserve that." John gave her a small, kind smile. "You stopped him by being here now," he said softly. Keanu stretched a little and pointed to the counter. "Put his meal on my tab," he said. "And make sure everyone here gets dessert." The people in the diner murmured their thanks. The fear in the room was replaced with a quiet feeling of togetherness. Strangers shared looks that said more than words ever could. They all understood they had witnessed something special. As Keanu turned to leave, John called out, "Wait." Keanu stopped and looked back at him. "Thank you," John said, his voice shaky. "Not just for me but for him too. You saw the man behind the mask." Keanu gave him a small, sad smile, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Sometimes we all just need someone to remind us we're more than our mistakes," he said. Just as Keanu turned to go, the door to the diner opened again. This time it wasn't the police or a stranger. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide. She held a small bag tightly against her chest. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. John froze, his breath catching in his throat. His tired, weathered eyes grew wide. "Clara?" he choked out, his hand shaking as he grabbed the armrest of his wheelchair. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. I heard what happened here. Someone texted about a veteran at a diner. I had to see if it was you." John's lips trembled. His voice broke as he whispered, You're alive?" Clara dropped her bag and ran to him, falling to her knees in front of him. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she sobbed. I left because I was angry. I thought you didn't care, but I was wrong. I was so wrong. John couldn't speak. He reached out and hugged her tightly, holding her as if she might disappear again. The room, once full of chaos and fear, was now filled with love. Even Keanu, standing by the counter, quietly wiped a tear from his face. I thought I lost you, John finally whispered into her hair. And I thought I lost you, she replied, her voice muffled against his chest. Keanu stepped closer, his presence calm and kind. Sometimes, he said softly, it takes the hardest nights to bring us back to the people who matter most. Clara looked up at Keanu, her eyes wide. Are you Keanu Reeves? She asked, almost in disbelief. Keanu chuckled, breaking the tension. I am. But tonight, I'm just a guy who got to see something amazing. Clara smiled through her tears, then turned back to her dad. Let's go home, Dad, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Let's start over. John nodded, his face glowing even though it was streaked with tears. I'd like that, he whispered. The people in the diner began to clap softly. Their hearts were full as they watched a father and daughter walk out together, arm in arm, with Buddy trotting faithfully beside them. The world outside felt brighter and kinder. Keanu watched them leave, a small smile on his lips. He turned to the waitress and said, Make sure everyone's meal is on me. This place feels like it could use a fresh start too. As he stepped into the cool October night, Keanu felt a warmth in his heart. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can always find its way back in. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.